courts, crying out that judgment was at the door. The people laughed. The priests rejected him. The kings ignored him. God would never abandon his chosen city, they said. The temple guarantees our protection. Then, on a day that shattered history, the unthinkable happened, and Jeremiah watched his prophecies materialize into nightmare. The book of Lamentations is the only biblical text written from ground zero of fulfilled prophecy. This isn't prediction, it's documentation. 5 carefully structured acrostic poems, each letter of the Hebrew alphabet becoming a step deeper into catastrophe. But here's what scholars miss. Buried in chapter 3, at the exact mathematical center of the book, lies the most profound statement about God's character ever written. 22 verses of despair suddenly pivot to 22 verses that have become the foundation of Christian hope worldwide. Why would God allow his own house to burn? What happens when divine patience runs out? And how does a prophet find mercy in the midst of deserved judgment? The answers will challenge everything you thought you knew about God's love and justice. The book opens with a picture that breaks the heart. Jerusalem, the city that once overflowed with people, now sits completely alone. Chapter 1, verse 1 captures this tragic transformation. How deserted lies the city, once so full of people. How like a widow is she, who once was great among the nations. She who was queen among the provinces has now become a slave. Think about what this means. This wasn't just any city. This was Jerusalem, the place where God's temple stood, where kings ruled, where festivals brought thousands of pilgrims from every direction. The streets used to buzz with merchants selling their goods, children playing, people going about their daily lives. Now, silence, emptiness. The comparison to a widow tells us everything. A widow has lost her protector, her provider, her companion. She sits alone in her grief, and no one comes to comfort her. The text says she was great among the nations and queen among the provinces. Jerusalem once commanded respect. Other nations paid tribute to her. She had influence, power, political weight. But something catastrophic happened, and now she's described as a slave. The complete reversal couldn't be more dramatic. From queen to slave, from crowded to deserted, from protected to vulnerable. Verse 2 continues the image. Bitterly she weeps at night. Tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers there is no one to comfort her. All her friends have betrayed her. They have become her enemies. The weeping doesn't stop. Night after night, the tears flow. This isn't a momentary sadness. It's a grief that has settled in and won't leave. The tears on her cheeks show that the crying is constant, visible, unashamed. The mention of lovers and friends in verse 2 brings us to one of the most painful parts of Jerusalem's story: betrayal. These weren't enemies from the beginning. These were nations that Jerusalem had treaties with, countries she trusted, allies she thought would stand by her side when trouble came. But when Jerusalem needed them most, they turned their backs. Worse than that, they became her enemies. Verse 3 explains what happened to Judah. After affliction and harsh labor, Judah has gone into exile. She dwells among the nations. She finds no resting place. All who pursue her have overtaken her in the midst of her distress. The people of Judah didn't just suffer defeat, they were carried away from their homeland. They're living in foreign countries now, scattered among nations that don't care about them, and there's no rest. Everywhere they turn, they're pursued, caught, overwhelmed. The verse says they were overtaken in the midst of her distress. Imagine being in your worst moment, your lowest point, and that's when your enemies strike. That's when those you trusted choose to attack instead of help. Jerusalem reached out for support and found none. The political alliances she had carefully built over the years dissolved the moment they were tested. Verse 19 adds more detail about this betrayal. I called to my allies, but they betrayed me. My priests and my elders perished in the city while they searched for food to keep themselves alive. Jerusalem called for help. She sent messengers, made appeals, reminded her allies of their agreements, but they betrayed her. The Hebrew word here is strong. It means they deliberately deceived her. They acted treacherously. These weren't neutral parties who simply chose not to get involved. They actively turned against Jerusalem in her hour of need. Now we meet the voice behind these words, the prophet himself watching everything unfold. Verse 16 reveals his emotional state. "This is why I weep and my eyes overflow with tears. No one is near to comfort me, no one to restore my spirit. My children are destitute because the enemy has prevailed." The prophet isn't writing as a distant observer. He's in the middle of this catastrophe, and it's destroying him emotionally. His eyes overflow with tears. The Hebrew suggests a continuous flowing, like a fountain that won't stop. This isn't crying that comes and goes, it's a constant stream of grief. And notice what he says, "No one is near to comfort me." The loneliness isn't just Jerusalem's, it's personal. The prophet feels abandoned too. He mentions his children being destitute, which could refer to the literal children of Jerusalem, the people he shepherded and cared for, now left with nothing because the enemy won. The prophet's role makes this even more painful. He likely warned about this judgment. He probably stood in the streets and told people that this would happen if they didn't turn back to God, and they didn't listen. Now, he's watching his worst predictions come true, and there's no satisfaction in being right, only overwhelming sorrow. Verse 12 shows him trying to make others understand the magnitude of what's happening. "Is it nothing to you, all you who pass by? Look around and see. Is any suffering like my suffering that was inflicted on me, that the Lord brought on me in the day of his fierce anger?" He's addressing people who might just walk by, glance at the ruins, and keep going. He's pleading with them to really look, to really see what happened here. This isn't ordinary suffering. This is something beyond normal human tragedy. While Jerusalem mourns, her enemies celebrate. Verse 7 paints a disturbing picture. In the days of her affliction and wandering, Jerusalem remembers all the treasures that were hers in days of old. When her people fell into enemy hands, there was no one to help her. Her enemies looked at her and laughed at her destruction. The timing makes it worse. In her moment of greatest vulnerability, when her people are falling into enemy hands, that's when the mocking begins. They're laughing at her destruction. These are people who saw Jerusalem's former glory, who knew what she once was, and now they're taking pleasure in watching her fall. The Hebrew word for laughed suggests scorn and derision. They're not just amused, they're actively mocking and ridiculing. Verse 10 shows how complete the violation was. The enemy laid hands on all her treasures. She saw pagan nations enter her sanctuary, those you had forbidden to enter your assembly. The most sacred space in Jerusalem was the temple, God's dwelling place among his people. There were strict laws about who could enter certain areas. Now foreign soldiers, people who don't worship the God of Israel, are walking through the sanctuary, taking whatever they want. It's not just military defeat, it's spiritual desecration. Verse 21 reveals what the enemies are saying. "People have heard my groaning, but there is no one to comfort me. All my enemies have heard of my distress. They rejoice at what you have done. May you bring the day you have announced, so they too may become like me." The enemies aren't silent in their triumph. They're vocal about it. They've heard Jerusalem's groaning, and it makes them happy. They rejoice specifically because God is the one who did this. They see it as proof that Jerusalem's God has abandoned her. Jerusalem wasn't just any city, it was beautiful, glorious, the pride of Israel. But now all that beauty is gone. Verse 6 states, "All the splendor has departed from daughter Zion. Her princes are like deer that find no pasture. In weakness they have fled before the pursuer." Splendor means glory, magnificence, beauty that makes people stop and stare. All of it gone, departed, left the city completely. The princes, who should be strong leaders, are compared to starving deer. Deer without pasture are desperate, weak, unable to defend themselves. These leaders have no strength left. They flee before their pursuers, but even their flight is feeble. There's no dignity in their escape, no valor in their retreat. They're simply too weak to do anything else. Verse 4 describes the physical emptiness. The roads to Zion mourn, for no one comes to her appointed festivals. All her gateways are desolate, her priests groan, her young women grieve, and she is in bitter anguish. The roads themselves are mourning. This poetic image shows that even the pathways that used to bring thousands of pilgrims to Jerusalem's festivals are now empty and sad. Gates that once opened to welcome worshippers now stand desolate. Priests who led celebrations now groan in despair. Young women who danced at festivals now grieve. Verse 10 mentioned the treasures being taken, but verse 11 shows the depth of the poverty. All her people groan as they search for bread. They barter their treasures for food to keep themselves alive. The people who once had plenty are now groaning as they hunt for basic food. They're so desperate they're trading away their valuable possessions, family heirlooms, precious items, just to get enough bread to survive one more day. The beauty and wealth are being sold off piece by piece just to avoid starvation. At this point in the chapter, the voice shifts. Jerusalem herself begins to speak, and what she says is crucial. Verse 8 contains her admission. Jerusalem has sinned greatly, and so has become unclean. All who honored her despise her, for they have all seen her naked. She herself groans and turns away in shame. She's not blaming others. She's not making excuses. She says directly, Jerusalem has sinned greatly. The word greatly matters. This wasn't small mistakes or minor failures. The sin was massive, serious, repeated. The result is that she's become unclean, ceremonially impure, spiritually defiled. Those who used to honor her now despise her because they've seen her nakedness, which in Hebrew culture represents complete shame and humiliation. Jerusalem groans and turns away, unable to face what she's become. Verse 9 continues her confession. Her filthiness clung to her skirts. She did not consider her future. Her fall was astounding. There was none to comfort her. The filthiness clinging to her skirts is a vivid image of sin that won't wash off, contamination that has become part of her. But here's the key phrase. She did not consider her future. Jerusalem lived in the moment, ignored the warnings, didn't think about where her choices were leading. She assumed tomorrow would always be like today. Her fall was astounding, meaning it shocked people. It was more severe than anyone imagined possible. Jerusalem the Great, Jerusalem the Strong, Jerusalem where God's temple stood, completely fallen. And once again, that painful refrain, there was none to comfort her. Verse 14 shows Jerusalem acknowledging God's role. My sins have been bound into a yoke. By his hands they were woven together. They have been hung on my neck, and the Lord has sapped my strength. He has given me into the hands of those I cannot withstand. She recognizes that her sins have become a yoke, a heavy burden around her neck, like what farmers put on oxen. And God himself wove this yoke, placed it on her. Her strength is gone because of him. He's the one who handed her over to enemies too strong for her to fight. Even in her confession, Jerusalem cries out for someone to see her pain. Verse 9 ends with her direct appeal. Look, Lord, on my affliction, for the enemy has triumphed. She's speaking to God now, asking him to look at what's happening. She's not denying she deserves it, but she's asking him to see how far the enemy has gone, how complete the triumph has been. Verse 11 ends with another plea. Look, Lord, and consider, for I am despised. Again, she asks God to look, to really consider what her state has become. The word despised means she's treated as worthless, as nothing. She's asking God to take notice of how low she's fallen. Verse 18 contains one of the most important verses in the chapter. The Lord is righteous, yet I rebelled against his commands. Listen, All you peoples, look on my suffering. My young men and young women have gone into exile. Even as she cries for compassion, she maintains her confession. The Lord is righteous, meaning he's done nothing wrong. Everything he did was just. Yet she rebelled. The fault is entirely hers. But then she asks all peoples to listen and look at her suffering. She wants witnesses to her pain. She mentions specifically the young men and women in exile, the next generation, taken away before they could live their lives. Verse 20 shows the depth of her cry. See, Lord, how distressed I am. I am in torment within, and in my heart I am disturbed, for I have been most rebellious. Outside the sword bereaves, inside there is only death. She's asking God to see her distress, her internal torment, the disturbance in her heart. And she admits again, I have been most rebellious, but look at the result, death everywhere. The sword kills those outside the city. Death waits for those inside. There's no escape, no safe place. The chapter keeps returning to one devastating reality. Jerusalem is alone. Verse 2 said it, among all her lovers there is no one to comfort her. Verse 9 repeated it, there was none to comfort her. Verse 16 said it again, no one is near to comfort me, no one to restore my spirit. And verse 17 makes it even clearer. Zion stretches out her hands, but there is no one to comfort her. The Lord has decreed for Jacob that his neighbors become his foes. Jerusalem has become an unclean thing among them. The image of Zion stretching out her hands is powerful. It's the gesture of someone reaching for help, reaching for another person to grab onto. But the hands find nothing, no one takes them, no one comes to help. And the verse explains why. God decreed it. He ordered that Jacob's neighbors would become enemies instead of helpers. Jerusalem is now viewed as an unclean thing, something people avoid, something that contaminates. Verse 21 brings us to the end with the same theme. People have heard my groaning, but there is no one to comfort me. Everyone can hear her pain. The groaning is loud, public, impossible to ignore, but hearing doesn't lead to helping. They listen to her suffer, and they do nothing. Some even rejoice, as we saw earlier. The isolation is complete. Jerusalem is surrounded by people who know she's in agony, and not one of them offers comfort. The chapter ends with Jerusalem's final prayer in verse 22. Let all their wickedness come before you. Deal with them as you have dealt with me because of all my sins. My groans are many, and my heart is faint. She's asking God to judge her enemies the way he judged her. If she suffered for her sins, let them suffer for theirs. It's not a prayer of forgiveness or mercy toward her enemies. It's a prayer for justice, for balance. And she ends by stating her current condition, many groans, a faint heart. She's at the end of her strength, barely holding on, with nothing left but her grief and her prayers for God to act. Chapter 2 opens with an image that would terrify anyone who understood what it meant. Verse 1 declares how the Lord has covered daughter Zion with the cloud of his anger. He has hurled down the splendor of Israel from heaven to earth. He has not remembered his footstool in the day of his anger. A cloud in Israel's history wasn't always bad. God led them through the wilderness with a cloud, but this cloud is different. This is the cloud of anger, dark and threatening. God hurled down Israel's splendor from heaven to earth. The word hurled shows force, violence, deliberate action. Everything high has been thrown down low, and then comes a phrase that should make anyone pause. He has not remembered his footstool. The footstool refers to the Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred object in the temple, the place where God's presence dwelt among his people. In his anger, God didn't protect it. He didn't remember it. The thing that symbolized his closeness to Israel, he let it fall. Verse 2 continues, without pity, the Lord has swallowed up all the dwellings of Jacob. In his wrath he has torn down the strongholds of daughter Judah. He has brought her kingdom and its princes down to the ground in dishonor. The phrase "without pity" is shocking. God, who is described throughout Scripture as compassionate and merciful, acted without pity here. He swallowed up dwellings, tore down strongholds, military fortresses that were supposed to be unbreakable. He brought the kingdom down to the ground in dishonor, stripping away any dignity or respect it once had. Verse 3 gets even more specific. In fierce anger, he has cut off every horn of Israel. He has withdrawn his right hand at the approach of the enemy. He has burned in Jacob like a flaming fire that consumes everything around it. The horn symbolizes strength and power. God cut off every single one, meaning he removed all of Israel's ability to defend herself. But here's what makes it worse. He withdrew his right hand. In battle, God's right hand was his power fighting for Israel. Now, as the enemy approaches, God pulls back. He's not fighting for them anymore. Instead, he's fighting against them like a fire that burns everything in its path. The destruction moves from the general to the specific, and nothing is more specific or more painful than what happened to the temple. Verse 4 describes God's position. Like an enemy, he has strung his bow. His right hand is ready. Like a foe, he has slain all who were pleasing to the eye. He has poured out his wrath like fire on the tent of daughter Zion. God is described as an enemy with a bow ready to shoot. He's called a foe. And he killed those who were pleasing to the eye, the young, the beautiful, those with their whole lives ahead of them. His wrath poured out like fire specifically on the tent of Zion, a reference to the tabernacle and temple. Verse 5 makes it explicit. The Lord is like an enemy. He has swallowed up Israel. He has swallowed up all her palaces and destroyed her strongholds. He has multiplied mourning and lamentation for daughter Judah. 3 times in these verses, God is compared to an enemy. He swallowed up Israel, the same language used for a monster devouring its prey. The palaces are gone, the strongholds are destroyed, and the result is multiplied mourning and lamentation, grief upon grief upon grief. Verse 6 focuses on the sacred spaces. He has laid waste his dwelling like a garden. He has destroyed his place of meeting. The Lord has made Zion forget her appointed festivals and her Sabbaths. In his fierce anger, he has spurned both king and priest. God destroyed his own dwelling place, the temple which took years to build, which was filled with gold and precious materials, which represented God's commitment to live among his people. He laid it waste like someone tears up a garden. The place of meeting where people came to worship is destroyed. The festivals are forgotten, the Sabbaths are ignored, and God has spurned, rejected, cast away both the king who ruled and the priest who served in his temple. Verse 7 gives more detail. The Lord has rejected his altar and abandoned his sanctuary. He has given the walls of her palaces into the hands of the enemy. They have raised a shout in the house of the Lord as on the day of an appointed festival. The altar where sacrifices were made, rejected. The sanctuary where prayers were offered, abandoned. Enemy soldiers are now inside the temple and they're shouting. Their victory cries echo in the same space where songs of worship used to rise. The verse compares their shouting to the noise of an appointed festival, which is a painful irony. The temple is full of sound again, but it's the wrong sound from the wrong people. The spiritual leaders who were supposed to guide the people and intercede with God are now dead. Verse 20 asks a horrifying question. Look, Lord, and consider, whom have you ever treated like this? Should women eat their offspring, the children they have cared for? Should priest and prophet be killed in the sanctuary of the Lord? The question about priests and prophets being killed in the sanctuary shows how complete the violation was. These men weren't killed in battle outside the city. They were killed inside the temple itself, in the holy place where they served. The sanctuary was supposed to be a place of refuge, a place of safety. The priests and prophets should have been protected there, but they weren't. They fell where they stood, in the very place they had dedicated their lives to serving God. The question, Whom have you ever treated like this? Suggests this level of judgment is unprecedented. Even in past judgments, God had never gone this far. Verse 14 addresses the prophet specifically, though in a different context. The visions of your prophets were false and worthless. They did not expose your sin to ward off your captivity. The prophecies they gave you were false and misleading. This explains part of why the judgment was so severe. The prophets who were supposed to warn the people instead gave them false hope. They said everything would be fine when it wouldn't be. They gave misleading prophecies that made people think they were safe when they were in terrible danger. Instead of exposing sin so people could repent, they covered it up with pleasant lies. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of the siege appears in verse 11. My eyes fail from weeping, I am in torment within. My heart is poured out on the ground because my people are destroyed, because children and infants faint in the streets of the city. The prophet's eyes are failing from crying so much. He's in torment inside his body. His heart feels like it's been poured out on the ground, completely emptied of life. And the reason is specific. Children and infants are fainting in the streets. These aren't soldiers. They're not the people who made the decisions that led to this judgment. They're children who don't understand what's happening, infants who can't even ask for food properly. They're collapsing in the streets from hunger and weakness. The image is unbearable. Little ones who should be playing, learning, growing, instead lying in the streets too weak to stand. Verse 12 continues, They say to their mothers, Where is bread and wine? As they faint like the wounded in the streets of the city, as their lives ebb away in their mother's arms. The children are crying out for bread and wine, basic food and drink. They're asking their mothers, trusting that mothers can fix everything, that mothers have answers, but the mothers have nothing to give. The children faint like wounded soldiers, which is a devastating comparison. Soldiers get wounded in battle by choice, knowing the risks. These children are casualties of a war they didn't choose and couldn't escape. The phrase, as their lives ebb away in their mother's arms, shows the final moments. The mothers are holding them, trying to comfort them, but they can only watch as life slowly leaves their children's bodies. There's nothing more they can do. No food to offer, no water to give. Just the helpless grief of watching death take their babies. Verse 20 contains a question so terrible that it almost shouldn't be written. Should women eat their offspring, the children they have cared for? This isn't hypothetical. During severe sieges in ancient times, when people were trapped inside city walls with no food coming in, the unthinkable sometimes happened. Starvation drove people to absolute madness. Mothers, whose instinct is to protect and nourish their children, were reduced to such desperate hunger that they did the unimaginable. The verse says, the children they have cared for, which makes it worse. These weren't strangers. These were the babies they had nursed, the toddlers they had fed, the children they had raised with love. The phrase emphasizes the relationship, the bond, the care that had existed. And now that's all been destroyed by starvation so complete that it broke the most fundamental human instinct, a mother's love for her child. This was actually prophesied in Deuteronomy as one of the curses that would come if Israel abandoned God's covenant. It was the worst-case scenario. The thing that showed judgment had reached its absolute maximum. And now it's happened. The theoretical curse has become horrible reality. Verse 12 showed children asking mothers for food. Verse 20 shows what happens when the starvation continues beyond all endurance. The mothers have no answers to give. They have no bread, no wine, no food of any kind. And in the absolute extremity of hunger, some crossed a line that should never be crossed. The text doesn't describe it in detail. It just asks the question, letting the horror speak for itself. We touched on this briefly, but verse 14 deserves full attention. The visions of your prophets were false and worthless. They did not expose your sin to ward off your captivity. The prophecies they gave you were false and misleading. The prophets were supposed to be God's messengers, the ones who heard from him and told the people what he said. But these prophets were giving false visions, messages that didn't come from God at all. The word worthless is important. Their visions had no value, no substance, no truth. They were empty words that sounded spiritual but meant nothing. These prophets stood in front of crowds and said, "Peace, peace," when there was no peace. They said God would protect Jerusalem no matter what, that the temple's presence guaranteed safety, that the enemy wouldn't succeed. The verse says they did not expose your sin. That was their job. A true prophet's role included pointing out where people had gone wrong, calling them to repentance, showing them the consequences of continuing in rebellion. But these false prophets didn't do that. They made people comfortable in their sin. They told them what they wanted to hear instead of what they needed to hear. If they had exposed the sin, they could have warded off captivity. There was still time. God gave warnings. He sent true prophets like Jeremiah, who did tell the truth. But the false prophets drowned out the true ones. They were more popular because their message was easier to hear. And their false, misleading prophecies helped lead the nation into the disaster that was now happening. They bear responsibility for what happened because they failed to do their job. The enemies aren't silent observers. They're active participants in mocking Jerusalem's fall. Verse 15 describes their reaction. All who pass your way clap their hands at you. They scoff and shake their heads at daughter Jerusalem. Is this the city that was called the perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth? Clapping hands in this context isn't applause. It's a gesture of mockery and contempt. They're scoffing, which means they're laughing with derision and scorn. And notice what they're saying. Is this the city that was called the perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth? They're throwing Jerusalem's former glory back in her face. They remember what she claimed to be, what she was known as. The perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth. Those were real titles, real descriptions of what Jerusalem once was. Now the enemies are using those very titles to mock her fall. Look at you now, they're saying. Where's your perfection? Where's your beauty? Where's your joy? Verse 16 continues, all your enemies open their mouths wide against you. They scoff and gnash their teeth and say, we have swallowed her up. This is the day we have waited for. We have lived to see it. Opening their mouths wide is a gesture of aggression and contempt. Gnashing teeth shows anger and hatred. These enemies aren't just happy Jerusalem fell, they're actively celebrating with hostile, hateful gestures. They say, we have swallowed her up. They're taking credit for the destruction, claiming victory for themselves. And they say, this is the day we have waited for. We have lived to see it. They've been anticipating this. They've wanted this for a long time. For years, maybe generations, they've hoped to see Jerusalem brought low. And now their hope has come true. They're savoring every moment of her humiliation. The chapter ends where it began, with tears. But these tears are described in a way that shows they're not going to stop. Verse 18 calls out, the hearts of the people cry out to the Lord. You walls of daughter Zion, let your tears flow like a river day and night. Give yourself no relief, your eyes no rest. The tears are supposed to flow like a river, constant, unstoppable, always moving, day and night without stopping. The command is to give yourself no relief. Don't stop crying. Don't rest your eyes. Keep the tears flowing because the situation demands it. The grief is so large that it requires continual expression. To stop crying would be to minimize what's happened, to pretend things aren't as bad as they are. Verse 19 continues the call to tears. Arise, cry out in the night as the watches of the night begin. Pour out your heart like water in the presence of the Lord. Lift up your hands to him for the lives of your children who faint from hunger at every street corner. The instruction is to cry out in the night, during the watches when guards would normally keep alert. Instead of sleeping, cry. Pour out your heart like water, completely holding nothing back. And the crying isn't just emotional release. It's prayer. Lift up your hands to him for the lives of your children. Even in judgment, even in anger, even after everything that's happened, the instruction is still to pray to the Lord, to lift hands up to him and plead for the children who are fainting from hunger at every street corner. The crying becomes intercession, grief becomes prayer, tears become a language of desperate appeal to the God who brought this judgment. Verse 11 had already shown the prophet's personal tears. My eyes fail from weeping, I am in torment within, my heart is poured out on the ground. His eyes are literally failing. He's cried so much that his vision is affected. He's in physical torment from the emotional pain. His heart is poured out like something liquid emptied from a container. And all of this is because of what he sees happening to his people, especially to the children. Chapter 3 shifts dramatically. Instead of describing the city, a single voice speaks in first person, I am the man. Verse 1 begins, I am the man who has seen affliction by the rod of the Lord's wrath. This is personal testimony. One man speaking about what he's experienced under God's anger. The rod of wrath is an instrument of punishment, and this man has felt every blow. Verse 2 continues, He has driven me away and made me walk in darkness rather than light. God didn't just allow darkness, he actively drove this man into it, made him walk there. The contrast matters, not in light, but in darkness. Light represents guidance, safety, understanding, hope. Darkness is confusion, danger, blindness, despair. And this man has been forced to walk in that darkness. Verse 3 adds intensity. Indeed, he has turned his hand against me again and again, all day long. The word again and again shows repetition. This isn't a single moment of judgment. It's continuous, relentless, happening all day long. God's hand, which could protect and bless, has turned against him. Every moment brings another strike, another weight, another reminder that God is opposing him. Verse 6 uses powerful imagery. He has made me dwell in darkness like those long dead. This isn't temporary darkness like nighttime that ends with dawn. This is the darkness of the grave, the darkness of death, the kind of darkness that doesn't lift. He's been placed among those who died long ago, shut away from life and light. The comparison to the dead shows how complete his separation feels, cut off from everything living, everything good. The suffering moves from spiritual to physical. Verse 4 describes bodily deterioration. He has made my skin and my flesh grow old and has broken my bones. The skin and flesh growing old means premature aging, the body breaking down before its time. This isn't natural aging from living a long life. This is being aged by suffering, worn down by constant affliction. And the bones being broken shows structural damage, the very frame of the body being shattered. Verse 5 continues the physical assault. He has besieged me and surrounded me with bitterness and hardship. The language of siege, which applied to Jerusalem as a city, now applies to this individual. He's surrounded, trapped with bitterness and hardship, pressing in from every side. There's no direction he can turn to find relief. Every angle is blocked. Verse 7 describes the imprisonment. He has walled me in, so I cannot escape. He has weighed me down with chains. Physical walls prevent movement. Chains add weight, restrict freedom, mark someone as a captive. The man is trapped with no possibility of escape. The walls are too high, too strong. The chains are too heavy. Whatever strength he might have had to break free is insufficient against what God has put in place. Verse 11 uses animal imagery. He dragged me from the path and mangled me and left me without help. The word mangled suggests the violence of a predator attacking prey. He was dragged off his path, the way he was walking, the direction he was going, and torn apart. and then left, abandoned, with no help coming, no rescue arriving, just lying there mangled and alone. The sense of being trapped intensifies. Verse 7 already mentioned being walled in, but verse 9 adds more. He has barred my way with blocks of stone. He has made my paths crooked. Not only are there walls, but the path itself is blocked with massive stones. These aren't pebbles that can be moved aside. These are blocks of stone, requiring serious effort to shift. And even if he could move them, the paths have been made crooked. There's no straight way out. Every route twists and turns, leading nowhere. Verse 53 describes an even more extreme form of confinement. They tried to end my life in a pit and threw stones at me. A pit is a hole in the ground, often used as a prison or trap. To be thrown into a pit means complete helplessness. You can't climb out on your own. The walls are too steep, too high, and they threw stones at him while he was down there. People standing at the top, hurling stones down on someone who has no way to dodge or protect himself. Verse 54 continues, the waters closed over my head, and I thought I was about to perish. Now there's water filling the pit. It's rising, covering his head, making it impossible to breathe. This is drowning, the most primal fear of suffocation, of life being choked off. He thought death was certain. There was no air, no way to survive. The end seemed to have come. Verse 8 had already mentioned another form of blocked access. Even when I call out or cry for help, he shuts out my prayer. His cries don't reach anywhere. The prayers hit a wall and stop. This is spiritual confinement matching the physical. He can't escape physically and he can't reach God spiritually. Every avenue is blocked. Every door is shut. Every possibility of rescue or relief is closed off. The blocked prayers deserve deeper attention. Verse 8 stated it clearly. Even when I call out or cry for help, he shuts out my prayer. The man is praying. He hasn't given up on calling to God. He cries for help. These aren't quiet, polite prayers. These are desperate shouts. But God shuts them out, blocks them, refuses to let them through. Verse 44 uses different imagery for the same reality. You have covered yourself with a cloud so that no prayer can get through. The cloud here isn't the cloud of God's presence that guided Israel. This is a cloud that acts as a barrier, a wall between the man and God. It's thick enough that prayers can't penetrate it. They rise up, hit the cloud, and stop. God has deliberately placed this barrier, covering himself so the prayers can't reach him. Verse 17 describes what it feels like. I've been deprived of peace. I've forgotten what prosperity is. Peace is gone. He's been deprived of it, meaning it's been taken away, not just lost. He can't even remember prosperity anymore. When life is hard for long enough, the good times fade from memory. He can't recall what it felt like to have things go well, to experience blessing, to know peace. Verse 18 shows the depth of his despair. So I say, my splendor is gone, and all that I had hoped from the Lord. His splendor, his dignity, his glory, his value is gone. Every hope he had placed in the Lord has disappeared. This is the crisis point of faith. When prayers bounce back, when God seems absent, when suffering continues without relief, hope dies. And this man is announcing that his hope is dead. Then, suddenly, everything shifts. Right in the middle of the darkness, in verse 21, comes one of the most important phrases in the entire book. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. After all the suffering, all the complaints, all the descriptions of God's wrath, the word yet. But, however, despite everything, this I call to mind, meaning he deliberately chooses to remember something. He reaches into his memory and pulls out a truth. It's an act of will. His circumstances haven't changed. The walls are still there. The prayers still seem blocked. But he makes a choice to remember, and that memory brings hope. What does he remember? Verse 22 reveals it. Because of the Lord's great love we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. This is the center of the entire book. Surrounded by verses about suffering on one side and suffering on the other, this statement about God's love and compassion sits in the middle. The man realizes something crucial. If they were being treated according to pure justice, they would be completely consumed, wiped out, destroyed entirely. The fact that they still exist means God's love is still operating. The phrase, "His compassions never fail," is absolute, not "they usually don't fail," or "they rarely fail." They never fail. Zero exceptions. God's compassion is as reliable as any force in the universe. More reliable, actually, because it's connected to his character, which doesn't change. Verse 23 continues, "They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness." Every morning, not just once at the beginning, not just occasionally. Every single morning brings new compassion, fresh mercy. Yesterday's compassion was sufficient for yesterday. Today requires new compassion, and it's there. The repetition of "new every morning" has become one of the most quoted phrases in all of Scripture because it speaks to a fundamental human need, the need for daily grace. The concept of new mercies deserves fuller attention. Verse 23 said they come every morning. But what does that mean practically? It means that God's mercy isn't a limited resource that gets used up. It's not like a bank account that depletes. Every sunrise brings a fresh supply. No matter what happened yesterday, no matter how badly someone failed or how deeply they suffered, the morning brings new mercy. The phrase, "Great is your faithfulness," connects to this. God's faithfulness is what guarantees the new mercies. He's faithful to his own character, faithful to his promises, faithful to his nature as a compassionate God. That faithfulness is great. It's large, significant, weighty. It can be counted on absolutely. Verse 24 shows the man's response. "I say to myself, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait for him." He's preaching to himself, declaring truth to his own soul. The Lord is my portion means God himself is the inheritance, the possession, the treasure. Not God's gifts, not what God can provide, God himself. When everything else is stripped away, when all the blessings are gone, God remains, and he's enough. Therefore I will wait for him. The decision to wait flows from the reality that God is his portion. If God is all he has and all he needs, then waiting for God makes sense. It's not passive resignation, it's active trust. He's choosing to position himself in expectation that God will act. Verse 25 makes a statement about God's character. "The Lord is good to those whose hope is in him, to the one who seeks him." God is good, not neutral, not harsh, good. But notice the conditions. To those whose hope is in him, to the one who seeks him. The goodness is experienced by those who turn toward God, who place their confidence in him, who actively look for him. This doesn't mean God is only good to certain people. It means his goodness is received and recognized by those who are paying attention to him. Verse 26 introduces a posture. It is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. This isn't anxious waiting. It's not restless pacing or constant complaining. It's quiet waiting. There's a calmness to it, a peace in the waiting itself. The salvation hasn't come yet, that's why waiting is necessary. But the waiting can be good. The process itself has value. Verse 27 adds something surprising. It is good for a man to bear the yoke while he is young. A yoke is a burden, a load, a weight. And the verse says it's good to bear it while young. Why? Because learning to carry weight early builds strength, develops character, creates endurance that will be needed later. Young people often resist discipline, but the man who learns to bear a yoke while young will be stronger as he ages. Verse 28 continues the picture. Let him sit alone in silence, for the Lord has laid it on him. Sitting alone in silence is the opposite of running around trying to fix everything. It's acceptance. It's stillness. It's being quiet before God. The reason given is important, for the Lord has laid it on him. This burden didn't come randomly. It came from God with purpose. If God laid it there, sitting under it in silence is appropriate. Verse 29 gives a specific posture. Let him bury his face in the dust. There may yet be hope. Burying the face in dust is a sign of humility, of submission, of recognizing how low someone has fallen. But notice the phrase at the end. There may yet be hope. Even in the dust, even at the absolute bottom, hope remains possible. The word may doesn't guarantee it, but it leaves the door open. Hope isn't dead, it's yet to come. Verse 30 continues, let him offer his cheek to one who would strike him, and let him be filled with disgrace. This sounds like Jesus' teaching about turning the other cheek. It's not fighting back, not defending oneself, not seeking revenge. It's accepting the strike, accepting the disgrace. This requires incredible strength. It's harder to not fight back than to fight. Verse 31 gives the reason this posture makes sense, for no one is cast off by the Lord forever. This is crucial. The discipline isn't permanent. The rejection isn't eternal. Forever is specifically denied. There's an end coming. The suffering has a limit. God hasn't abandoned forever. He's disciplining temporarily. Verse 32 explains what happens next. Though he brings grief, he will show compassion. So great is his unfailing love. The grief and the compassion both come from the same God. He brings grief. He doesn't deny responsibility for it, but he will show compassion. Future tense. It's coming, and the motivation is his unfailing love. The love that never fails is what guarantees the compassion will come. Verse 33 reveals something about God's heart, for he does not willingly bring affliction or grief to anyone. The word willingly is key. God doesn't enjoy causing pain. He doesn't take pleasure in making people suffer. It's not his preference, not his desire, not his will, in the sense of what makes him happy. When affliction comes from God, it's purposeful but not joyful for him. He does it because it's necessary, not because he wants to. Verse 37 asks a rhetorical question. Who can speak and have it happen if the Lord has not decreed it? The answer is no one. Nothing happens without God's decree. This could be frightening, but in context it's comforting. It means the suffering isn't random chaos. It's not meaningless accident. God decreed it, which means it has purpose, it has limits, and it will end when God says it ends. Verse 38 continues, Is it not from the mouth of the Most High that both calamities and good things come? Both. Not just the good comes from God while the bad comes from elsewhere. Both calamities and good things flow from the same source. This is complete sovereignty. God is in control of everything, including the hard things. And if he controls the calamities, he can also control their duration and their outcome. The discipline that seems crushing now is still under God's hand, which means it can still lead to hope. Chapter 4 opens with a shocking image. Verse 1 declares, How the gold has lost its luster, the fine gold become dull, the sacred gems are scattered at every street corner. Gold doesn't naturally lose its luster. It's one of the few metals that doesn't tarnish or corrode. For gold to become dull means something catastrophic happened. This isn't natural decay. This is destruction so severe that even gold, the most precious metal, looks worthless. The fine gold has become dull. The distinction between regular gold and fine gold matters. Fine gold is the purest, the most valuable, the most carefully refined. If even that has lost its shine, nothing retains value. The sacred gems being scattered at street corners shows how completely things have been overturned. Gems that belonged in the temple, that were part of the priest's garments, that were carefully guarded and honored, now lie in the dirt where people walk. Treasures treated like trash. Verse 2 makes the comparison personal. How the precious children of Zion, once worth their weight in gold, are now considered as pots of clay, the work of a potter's hands. The children of Zion, the people, were once valued like gold. Their worth was measured against the most precious substance known. But now they're considered like clay pots. Clay is cheap, common, easily broken. A potter makes hundreds of pots. If one breaks, he makes another. There's no special value attached to any single pot. This is the contrast being drawn throughout the chapter. Then versus now. What was precious has become common. What was honored is now despised. What was carefully protected is now carelessly discarded. The transformation is complete and devastating. Topic 4, Then and Now. Chapter 4, 4.1. Gold losing its luster. Chapter 4 opens with a shocking image. Verse 1 declares, "How the gold has lost its luster, the fine gold become dull. The sacred gems are scattered at every street corner." Gold doesn't naturally lose its luster. It's one of the few metals that doesn't tarnish or corrode. For gold to become dull means something catastrophic happened. This isn't natural decay. This is destruction so severe that even gold, the most precious metal, looks worthless. The fine gold has become dull. The distinction between regular gold and fine gold matters. Fine gold is the purest, the most valuable, the most carefully refined. If even that has lost its shine, nothing retains value. The sacred gems being scattered at street corners shows how completely things have been overturned. Gems that belonged in the temple, that were part of the priest's garments, that were carefully guarded and honored, now lie in the dirt where people walk. Treasures treated like trash. Verse 2 makes the comparison personal. How the precious children of Zion, once worth their weight in gold, are now considered as pots of clay, the work of a potter's hands. The children of Zion, the people, were once valued like gold. Their worth was measured against the most precious substance known, but now they're considered like clay pots. Clay is cheap, common, easily broken. A potter makes hundreds of pots. If one breaks, he makes another. There's no special value attached to any single pot. This is the contrast being drawn throughout the chapter. Then verses now. What was precious has become common. What was honored is now despised. What was carefully protected is now carelessly discarded. The transformation is complete and devastating. 4.2. Princes more radiant than rubies. Verse 7 describes what the princes used to look like. Their princes were brighter than snow, whiter than milk, their bodies more ruddy than rubies, their appearance like lapis lazuli. This is beauty at its peak. Brighter than snow means pure, clean, radiant. Whiter than milk emphasizes the purity even more. The description, more ruddy than rubies, refers to healthy skin with good color, the glow of someone well-fed and well cared for. Rubies are deep red, precious stones. To be compared to them means having that rich, healthy appearance. Lapis lazuli is a deep blue stone, highly valued in the ancient world. Saying their appearance was like lapis lazuli suggests something striking, something that caught the eye, something beautiful and rare. These princes weren't just healthy, they were stunning. They represented the best of Jerusalem's people, strong, beautiful, impressive in every way. Verse 8 shows what they look like now. But now they are blacker than soot. They are not recognized in the streets. Their skin has shriveled on their bones. It has become as dry as a stick. Blacker than soot means covered in grime, darkened by suffering, the opposite of the brightness they once had. They're not recognized in the streets. People who knew them can't even identify them anymore. The transformation is so severe that familiar faces have become unrecognizable. Their skin has shriveled on their bones. This is the language of extreme starvation. When the body has no fat left, no muscle left, the skin pulls tight against the skeleton. Bones become visible, prominent, defining the shape of the body. The comparison to a dry stick emphasizes how all moisture, all life, all vitality has been drained away. They're living, but barely. The contrast to verse 7 couldn't be sharper, from radiant and ruby red to shriveled and stick-like. Verse 10 contains one of the most horrifying statements in all of Scripture. With their own hands, compassionate women have cooked their own children, who became their food when my people were destroyed. The word compassionate makes it worse. These aren't cruel women, not harsh or uncaring mothers. These are compassionate women, women whose natural instinct is to nurture, to protect, to care for their children. But starvation drove them beyond all natural instinct. The phrase, "with their own hands," emphasizes their direct involvement. They prepared the food themselves. They did the unthinkable thing with their own hands. And what they prepared was their own children, the babies they had given birth to, the children they had nursed and raised. Those children became their food, not someone else's food, their own. The verse ends with context, "when my people were destroyed." This happened during the final destruction of Jerusalem, during the siege when no food could come into the city and everything inside had been consumed. This was the absolute bottom, the worst possible outcome of judgment. It fulfilled the curse warned about in Deuteronomy 28:53-57, where Moses said, if they abandoned the covenant, things would get so bad that people would eat their own children. The text doesn't give details about how this happened or how many times it happened. It states the fact and moves on, letting the horror speak for itself. This is what judgment looked like at its most extreme point. This is where rebellion against God ultimately led. The protective love of mothers for children, one of the strongest forces in nature, was broken by the force of starvation. Nothing remained untouched by the disaster. Verse 6 makes a comparison that demands attention. The punishment of my people is greater than that of Sodom, which was overthrown in a moment without a hand turned to help her. Sodom was famously destroyed by fire from heaven. It happened suddenly. One moment the city existed, the next it was gone. The phrase, "without a hand turned to help her," means the destruction was so quick that no one could do anything. No rescue attempts, no chance to save anyone, just instant annihilation. But now the verse says Jerusalem's punishment is greater. How can anything be worse than instant destruction? The answer lies in duration. Sodom's suffering was momentary. The people of Sodom died quickly without prolonged agony. But Jerusalem's suffering stretched out over months. The siege lasted, the starvation continued, the death came slowly. Day after day of watching people waste away, of feeling hunger gnaw at your own body, of seeing things get progressively worse with no relief. Verse 9 explains it directly. Those killed by the sword are better off than those who die of famine. Racked with hunger, they waste away for lack of food from the field. Being killed by the sword means a quick death, painful perhaps, but fast. But dying of famine is a slow torture. The body consumes itself piece by piece. The mind is consumed by the thought of food. Each day brings more weakness, more suffering, more desperation. The verse says they're racked with hunger, tormented by it, controlled by it, destroyed by it slowly. The comparison means that God's people experienced more prolonged suffering than one of the most infamous cities in biblical history. The judgment wasn't less severe. It was more severe precisely because it lasted longer and involved watching everything collapse in slow motion rather than instant destruction. Verse 13 identifies a cause for the judgment. But it happened because of the sins of her prophets and the iniquities of her priests who shed within her the blood of the righteous. The prophets and priests, the spiritual leaders, bear specific responsibility. These were the people who were supposed to represent God to the people and the people to God. They held positions of spiritual authority and trust, but they shed blood of the righteous within the city. They killed innocent people. The word righteous means these weren't criminals being executed for crimes. These were good people, people who didn't deserve death. And the prophets and priests were involved in their deaths. Whether they did the killing directly or ordered it or allowed it to happen, they're held responsible. Verse 14 describes their condition after the judgment. Now they grope through the streets as if they were blind. They are so defiled with blood that no one dares to touch their garments. They grope like blind people, stumbling, uncertain, unable to find their way. The spiritual blindness has become physical disorientation, and they're defiled with blood, covered in it, marked by it. The blood of those they killed or failed to protect now stains them visibly. No one dares to touch their garments. In Israel's law, touching blood made someone ceremonially unclean. These priests, who were supposed to be clean so they could serve in the temple, are now so covered in blood that approaching them would contaminate anyone who came near. They've become the opposite of what they were called to be. Instead of making others clean, they make others unclean. Instead of bringing people to God, they drive people away. Verse 15 shows how people respond to them. "Go away, you are unclean." People cry to them, "Away, away, don't touch us." When they flee to other nations, people say they can stay here no longer. Even in exile, even when they try to find refuge in foreign countries, they're rejected. Their reputation has spread. Everyone knows what they did. The guilt follows them everywhere. No nation wants to harbor them. They're cast out again and again, finding no place to rest. Verse 20 speaks about the king, with language that shows how much hope had been placed in him. The Lord's anointed, our very life breath, was caught in their traps. We thought that under his shadow we would live among the nations. The king is called the Lord's anointed, meaning God had chosen him, set him apart, given him authority to rule. The phrase, our very life breath, shows how essential he was to the people. They saw him as necessary for their survival, like breathing. They thought that under his shadow they would live safely, even among hostile nations. The shadow represents protection, shelter, security. As long as the king was there, providing that covering, they believed they would survive. This was their confidence, their security, their plan for the future. But the verse says, he was caught in their traps. The king fell. He was captured by the enemy. The very person they thought would protect them became a prisoner himself. How could they live under his shadow if he was captured? How could he provide protection while trapped in enemy hands? The hope they placed in him proved unable to save them or himself. This likely refers to King Zedekiah, who tried to escape when Jerusalem fell, but was captured by the Babylonians. His sons were killed in front of him, then his eyes were put out, and he was taken to Babylon in chains. The anointed king, the one bearing God's special appointment, ended as a blind prisoner. The shadow that was supposed to protect collapsed entirely. Everyone who trusted in him found their trust misplaced. Verse 21 addresses a neighboring nation. Rejoice and be glad, daughter Edom, you who live in the land of Uz. But to you also the cup will be passed. You will be drunk and stripped naked. Edom was related to Israel. The Edomites descended from Esau, Jacob's brother. But instead of helping during Jerusalem's destruction, Edom rejoiced. They were glad to see their relatives fall. They celebrated Jerusalem's pain. The verse tells them to rejoice and be glad, but it's sarcastic. Go ahead, celebrate. Enjoy this moment, because the statement doesn't end there. But to you also, the cup will be passed. The cup represents God's judgment. Jerusalem drank from it. They experienced the full weight of God's anger. But Edom thinks they're exempt. They think they can watch from the sidelines, mocking and celebrating without consequences. The verse promises they're wrong. The same cup that Jerusalem drank will come to them. They'll be drunk from it, overwhelmed, unable to stand, completely overcome by judgment. And they'll be stripped naked, their shame exposed, their vulnerability revealed, their false sense of security removed. What they watched happen to Jerusalem will happen to them. Verse 22 contrasts Jerusalem's situation with Edom's. Your punishment will end, daughter Zion. He will not prolong your exile. But he will punish your sin, daughter Edom, and expose your wickedness. Jerusalem's punishment has a limit. It will end. The exile won't last forever. There's a finish line, a point where God says enough and brings restoration. This is mercy within judgment. The judgment is real, but it's not eternal. But Edom's sin will be punished. Their wickedness will be exposed. They thought they got away with something. They thought celebrating Jerusalem's fall had no consequences. They were wrong. God saw their response. He noted their lack of compassion, their mockery, their joy at their brother's suffering, and he will hold them accountable for it. Verse 22 contains a promise that frames everything. Your punishment will end, daughter Zion. He will not prolong your exile. After chapters describing catastrophic judgment, this verse announces an endpoint. The punishment isn't permanent. The exile won't last forever. God will not keep extending it indefinitely. There's a completion coming, a moment when he'll say the price has been paid. The word prolong is important. It means God could extend the punishment if he wanted to. He could make it last longer, but he won't. He's setting a limit based on his purposes, not based on whether the people have suffered enough or learned their lesson. The limit comes from his character and his plans, not from human merit. This promise of completion stands in stark contrast to everything that came before. The chapters described devastation, suffering, judgment without mercy. They showed God's fierce anger, his active opposition to his own people, his willingness to let terrible things happen. But underneath all of that, there remained a purpose and a plan. The judgment would accomplish what it was meant to accomplish, and then it would end. Verse 11 of chapter 4 had said, "The Lord has given full vent to his wrath. He has poured out his fierce anger. He kindled a fire in Zion that consumed her foundations." The phrase "given full vent" means he expressed his anger completely. He didn't hold back. The fierce anger was poured out entirely, not partially. The fire he kindled consumed foundations. It went all the way to the bottom, destroying the very base that everything else was built on. But precisely because the anger was fully vented, because it was poured out completely, there's nothing left to pour out. The judgment reached its completion. The wrath was satisfied, and that means restoration becomes possible. The end of punishment isn't just a stopping point, it's an opening for something new to begin. Chapter 5 shifts completely in tone and structure. The previous chapters used poetic acrostics, but this final chapter is a straightforward prayer, raw, direct, honest. Verse 1 begins, "Remember, Lord, what has happened to us. Look and see our disgrace." This is a plea for God's attention. The word remember in Hebrew carries weight. It doesn't mean God has forgotten. God doesn't forget. It means act on what you know. Do something about what you see. The request to look and see doubles down on the appeal. Look carefully, see thoroughly, don't glance away. The word disgrace is crucial. They're not just asking God to notice their pain. They're asking him to see their shame, their humiliation, how low they've fallen. This takes courage. To ask someone to look at your disgrace means being willing to be fully known in your worst moment. This opening sets the tone for the entire chapter. It's not accusation, it's not demanding. It's petition from a place of complete vulnerability. They have no leverage, no bargaining position, nothing to offer. All they can do is ask God to see them and respond. Verse 2 immediately explains what they want God to see. Our inheritance has been turned over to strangers, our homes to foreigners. The inheritance is everything. The land God promised Abraham, the territory given to each tribe, the fields passed down through generations. This wasn't just property, it was identity. It was God's gift to them. the physical proof of his covenant promises. Now it belongs to strangers, people who worship other gods, people who have no connection to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, people who never received the promises. The land that was supposed to stay in Israelite families forever has been taken by outsiders. The covenant promise seems broken. Our homes to foreigners makes it personal, not just national territory, but individual houses. The place where your family lived, where your children were born, where meals were shared and memories made, now foreign families live there. Foreign children sleep in those bedrooms. Foreign voices echo in those courtyards. Everything intimate and personal has been violated. Verse 3 adds the human cost. We have become fatherless, our mothers are widows. The loss of land connects directly to the loss of people. The inheritance passed to strangers because the fathers who should have passed it to their sons are dead. The war killed them. The siege took them. Disease claimed them. Now a generation of children grows up without fathers to teach them, protect them, guide them. The mothers are widows. In ancient Israel, a widow had no independent status. She depended on sons or brothers-in-law or the charity of others. To say our mothers are widows is to say the social safety net has collapsed. These women have lost husbands and security simultaneously. They face the future vulnerable and alone. The description of fatherless children and widows isn't isolated. It's pervasive. The language suggests this isn't a few families experiencing tragedy. This is a community-wide reality. Everywhere you look, there are children without fathers and women without husbands. The social fabric has been ripped apart. Verse 11 adds another layer of violation. Women have been violated in Zion and virgins in the towns of Judah. This is the horror of war. Women and girls who should have been protected were instead attacked. In Zion itself, the holy city, this happened. In the towns of Judah throughout the land, this violence occurred. The verse states it simply, but the implication is devastating. The innocent suffered not just loss, but abuse. Verse 12 continues describing the treatment of people. Princes have been hung up by their hands. Elders are shown no respect. The princes, men of high rank, leaders, nobles, are hung up by their hands. This could mean execution, or it could mean torture and humiliation. Either way, those who once held authority are now powerless, subjected to shameful treatment. Elders are shown no respect. In Israel's culture, age brought honor. Elders were revered for their wisdom and experience. They held positions of respect in the community. But the conquerors don't care about Israel's cultural values. They treat elders like anyone else. Maybe worse. The humiliation is deliberate. Everything that gave structure and dignity to society has been deliberately dismantled. Verse 4 describes their servile condition. We must buy the water we drink. Our wood can be had only at a price. Water and wood were basics of daily life. Water came from wells and springs that belonged to the community. Wood was gathered from nearby forests. These were things people accessed freely or obtained with minimal effort. They weren't commodities you purchased. They were natural resources you used. But now they must buy them. They pay for water. They pay for wood. This reveals their status. They own nothing, control nothing, have rights to nothing. They're living in their own land as though they're foreigners renting space. Everything that should be theirs by right has become something they must purchase from those who conquered them. Verse 5 makes the oppression clear. Those who pursue us are at our heels. We are weary and find no rest. They're being chased, hunted, pursued constantly. There's no break from the pressure. The image of pursuers at our heels means the threat is immediate, close, always present. They can't relax. They can't let their guard down. The exhaustion isn't just physical, it's the weariness of never feeling safe. We are weary and find no rest emphasizes the unending nature of their suffering. Rest isn't just sleep, it's peace, relief, a moment to recover. They have none of that. Each day is survival. Each night brings no relief. The cycle continues without break. Verse 6 adds a disturbing detail. We submitted to Egypt and Assyria to get enough bread. To survive, they had to submit to other nations. Egypt and Assyria were ancient enemies, yet the people had to humble themselves before these powers just to get food. Bread, the most basic necessity, required submission to foreign powers. Their independence is completely gone. Their dignity is stripped away. They're begging for survival from nations that have no reason to help them. Verse 8 describes their rulers. Slaves rule over us, and there is no one to free us from their hands. The word slaves is loaded with meaning. These could be people who were themselves slaves, now promoted to positions of power by the conquering nation, or it could mean they're ruled by people they consider unworthy of authority. Either way, the social order has been inverted. Those who should lead are powerless. Those who shouldn't rule have control. There is no one to free us from their hands is the cry of people trapped with no rescuer in sight. In their history, God raised up deliverers, judges, prophets, kings who freed them from oppression. But now, no one comes. No champion appears. No deliverer rises. They're stuck under the rule of those they despise with no hope of freedom. Verse 15 captures the emotional devastation. Joy is gone from our hearts. Our dancing has turned to mourning. Joy hasn't decreased, it's gone, completely departed. The heart, which should be the source of emotions both high and low, feels nothing but sorrow now. Joy used to live there, but it packed up and left. Dancing turned to mourning. This is total reversal. Dancing represents the peak of celebration, weddings, victories, festivals. It's movement, energy, life at its fullest. Mourning is the opposite, stillness, weeping, death's shadow. Where there used to be celebration, now there's only grief. The contrast couldn't be sharper. Verse 14 shows how community life has stopped. The elders are gone from the city gate. The young men have stopped their music. The city gate was the hub of community life. Elders sat there to conduct business, settle disputes, make decisions, teach the younger generation. It was where wisdom was shared and justice was administered. Now the elders are gone, either dead or in exile or too broken to fulfill their role. Young men stopped their music. Music was the soundtrack of daily life. Work songs, love songs, worship songs. Young men played instruments, sang, created the audio backdrop that made life feel alive. But now, silence. The music has stopped because there's nothing to sing about. The instruments are put away. The songs are forgotten. Life has become so grim that music feels impossible. Verse 16 states, "The crown has fallen from our head." The crown represents everything they once were: chosen people, royal priesthood, nation set apart by God. It crowned them with honor, dignity, special status. But it has fallen, dropped from their head to the dirt. The thing that made them special, that set them apart, that gave them identity, gone. The image of the fallen crown deserves deeper exploration. Verse 16 continues immediately after mentioning the crown. "Woe to us, for we have sinned." This connection is crucial. The crown didn't fall by accident. It didn't slip off. Their sin knocked it off. They understand the cause and effect relationship now. They see clearly what they might have denied before. Their choices led directly to their current state. Woe to us is a cry of grief and recognition. It's not blaming God. It's not blaming circumstances. It's acknowledging personal and corporate responsibility. We have sinned is confession without excuse, without minimizing, without trying to shift blame. This is acceptance of guilt. Verse 7 had already touched on generational sin. Our ancestors sinned and are no more, and we bear their punishment. This is complex. They're not saying they're innocent victims paying for someone else's sins. They're recognizing continuity. The ancestors sinned, breaking covenant, worshipping idols, ignoring prophets. Those ancestors are dead now. But the current generation bears the consequences of those choices, while also making their own sinful choices. The verse doesn't excuse personal responsibility. It acknowledges historical reality. Sin has consequences that ripple through time. Children do bear the results of their parents' choices, even while making their own choices. The generation in exile can't blame everything on their ancestors, but they also can't ignore that they inherited a situation already broken by previous generations. Verse 18 shifts focus to the physical location, for Mount Zion, which lies desolate, with jackals prowling over it. Mount Zion is the heart of everything, the location of the temple, the dwelling place of God's presence, the center of worship. It should be the most active, most sacred, most populated place in all of Israel. Pilgrims should be streaming to it. Priests should be serving there. Worship should be ascending from it constantly. Instead, it lies desolate, empty, abandoned, silent. The word desolate suggests complete devastation, not just temporarily empty, but ruined. And jackals prowl over it. Jackals are scavengers, wild animals that live in abandoned places. They avoid human activity. The fact that jackals roam freely over Mount Zion proves how thoroughly people have left. There's no one to disturb them. No priests performing rituals, no worshippers coming to pray, no children playing, just animals moving through ruins. This image is almost unbearable for the people praying this prayer. Mount Zion represented God's commitment to dwell among them. It was the physical sign of the covenant relationship. Seeing it overrun by wild animals means seeing the covenant relationship itself lying in ruins. Verse 17 explains their internal response. Because of this, our hearts are faint. Because of these things, our eyes grow dim. The desolation of Zion affects them physically and emotionally. Their hearts are faint, weak, struggling, barely functioning. Not from physical disease, but from the emotional trauma of seeing what's happened. Their eyes grow dim. This could be from constant weeping, or it could be the dimness that comes from despair. When hope fades, vision seems to fade too. Everything looks darker when the heart is broken. The physical symptoms manifest the spiritual and emotional devastation they're experiencing. The prayer moves toward its climax. Verse 19 makes a declaration. You, Lord, reign forever. Your throne endures from generation to generation. In the middle of describing complete devastation, they anchor themselves to this truth. Everything else may fall, but God's throne stands. Everything else may change, but God's reign continues. Jerusalem fell. The temple was destroyed. The people were scattered. But God remains God. Forever and from generation to generation, emphasize permanence. God isn't affected by what happened. His power didn't diminish. His authority didn't lessen. His throne didn't shake. While everything earthly crumbled, everything heavenly remained solid. This declaration is both comfort and foundation for what comes next. Verse 20 asks a painful question. Why do you always forget us? Why do you forsake us so long? This seems to contradict verse 1, which asked God to remember. But this is the honest cry of people in prolonged suffering. It feels like God has forgotten. It feels like He's forsaken them. The question, why do you always forget us, comes from people who feel perpetually abandoned. Why do you forsake us so long, emphasizes duration. If the forsaking was brief, maybe they could endure it. But it's gone on so long. The exile stretches out. The suffering continues. Day after day, month after month, year after year. When will it end? The question isn't accusation. It's the plea of people at the end of their endurance. Verse 21 is the heart of the prayer. Restore us to yourself, Lord, that we may return. Renew our days as of old. This is what they're really asking for. Not just better circumstances, not just return to the land. Restore us to yourself. Bring us back into relationship with you. The broken relationship with God is the core problem. Everything else flows from that. Fix the relationship and everything else becomes possible. That we may return shows they want to come back. They're ready to turn around, to come home, to resume walking with God. But they recognize they can't do it on their own. They need God's action. They need Him to make restoration possible. They can't restore themselves to Him. He must restore them to Himself. Renew our days as of old asks for restoration of blessing. The old days weren't perfect, but they were better than this. They had land. They had the temple. They had community. Give us back what we lost. Let us experience once more what we threw away through our sin. But the prayer ends with uncertainty. Verse 22 concludes, "Unless you have utterly rejected us and are angry with us beyond measure." The word "unless" introduces doubt. What if restoration isn't coming? What if God's rejection is permanent? What if His anger has no limit, no endpoint, no boundary? This final verse leaves everything hanging. There's no answer provided, no assurance given, no promise of restoration stated. The book ends with a question mark, with fear, with wondering if the rejection might be final. And yet, the very act of praying this prayer suggests hope hasn't completely died. They're still talking to God, still asking, still believing He might answer. The uncertainty is real, but so is the prayer. And prayer itself is an act of faith that someone is listening. If this journey through Lamentations opened your eyes to something new, hit that subscribe button so you won't miss our next deep dive into Scripture. Share this video with someone who needs to know that God's compassion never fails, even in their darkest hour. And let me know in the comments, what verse from Lamentations spoke to you most powerfully? Remember, weeping may last for the night, but joy comes in the morning.